What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Bitcoin and Markets. My name is Ansel Lindner. Happy Wednesday out there. Hope you guys are all doing well. I'm live streaming on Telegram and YouTube, and we're going to go over Richard Werner and his appearance on Tucker Carlson's show. I've known Richard Werner's stuff for a very long time, and I've quoted him in some of my blog posts about quantitative easing, the nature of credit-based money, and all that stuff. This is right in my wheelhouse because I am pretty much the only Bitcoiner out there that has talked about credit-based money, talked about the implications of the current system being credit-based and what that means for the future. So welcome to the show. Let's dive right in, share the screen. This is my Twitter. Check it out, guys, if you're not subscribed. At Ansel Lindner. Make myself a little bigger here. Okay. And then I'm going to share the other screen with you guys on Telegram. So it's that one. Share system audio. There we go. All right. So I recently liked it. So let's go through a few tweets just to warm up before we get into this reaction video. So Parker Lewis is back out here and he's talking about this inflation. This guy, Buco Capital, was using Parker Lewis and Peter Schiff, and he was saying Bitcoin and gold guys uniting to create an incredible bespoke consumer price index of only 2 items: Whole Foods dry aged wellness certified boneless ribeye and pool repair service costs in the Gold Coast of Connecticut. I mean, that's a funny way to put it, and I totally agree. I mean, it's 2 things in the CPI. That's kind of what I told Parker Lewis back when he made this tweet. If we bring this image up, he used one item in one store and compared it between years. But okay, there is a cycle all its own for beef, and beef happens to be in one of these more expensive years. It's usually 8 to 10 year cycle for beef and for the herds and all of that. And so beef just happens to be at the high end of its range. And so, yes, you can kind of maybe compare it over the long term, but this is maybe 4 or 5 years. And within that cycle, you're going to be at the opposite extreme of the range. And that's what I told him. And that's exactly what this Buco Capital was saying. Of course, Parker Lewis comes out here and he doesn't, I know he knows this, but he's trying to be defensive and say, yeah, the same store ribeye comps are fundamentally more sound inflation, blah, blah, blah. It's not fundamentally sound at all. Here's what we're going to be watching. Let's see. This is one thing that I've talked about recently with the 80,000 Bitcoins that came from, 14 years old, and they were just unlocked and sold. But Plebitor here has many Bitcoin treasury companies aren't buying Bitcoin. They're gifted BTC in exchange for discounted shares. And that's one thing I was speculating about. And I think we on the Telegram were speculating about this, that these coins weren't going into the open market. They were actually being used to launch some treasury company, and they were just being recycled in for those shares. This is exactly what we were saying about 2 weeks ago. And now it looks like there is some confirmation of these ideas. They're fundraising, and then they're actually accepting Bitcoin, in this case, 1,000 Bitcoins for shares. So interesting stuff. Arthur Hayes, we'll have to come watch that interview. I like his stuff. What else we got here? This is one that I shared with the Telegram. So a new poll shows that 60% of Germans say they wouldn't defend their country if it was invaded. And I was like, whoa, that's crazy. I wonder what it is for the U.S. And it was over 50%. Europe is in a bad way right now. I mean, I still kind of understand Germany saying this type of thing with the history of the 20th century, but that's old news, and they're going to not be on the map very much longer if they don't get their heads out their butts. Okay. Let's see what else we got. If there's anything worth talking about. Nah, I don't think so. Let's get to the Tucker Carlson stuff. And guys, I will be watching the chat. So if you are watching on YouTube, put the comment down there. I will answer any questions you have. And same with Telegram. You guys can put it in Telegram. And okay, Tim Bradford has a question. He says, will pay cuts be the norm under a Bitcoin standard? Probably, and that's very hard to do. It's much easier to give people raises than it is to give that people pay cuts, and that's a problem a lot of times with the idea of deflationary money is you have to constantly be cutting people's pay, and that's a much harder direction to go in than it is to give people raises. There's a lot of little queepy things, nuanced things about deflationary money. But of course, Bitcoin isn't deflationary money. It is fixed supply money. There might be some deflation, yeah, because people will be losing Bitcoins. So there might be some deflation in that respect. But there will also be derivatives. There will be other forms of credit, and there will be forms of inflation on top of Bitcoin. It just won't be in Bitcoin itself. So booms and busts will be more limited. They will still be around because that's human nature. And Bitcoin is not going to last forever. So some people think that, monetary evolution is a straight line towards perfection. Okay. But then they can't explain why we're on credit money and not gold standard right now. They'll say, oh, we're forced off of the gold standard. But I mean, if a majority of people didn't want to go off the gold standard, they wouldn't go off the gold standard. Right? The market wouldn't choose to go off the gold standard, but it did. And so how do you explain that? So monetary evolution is not a straight line towards better and better money. It's really hard to define. It's impossible, in my opinion, how to define better money. There's money that is better under certain circumstances in certain environments. And then there's different money that's better under different circumstances. So years down the road, maybe 100, 200, 500 years down the road, we will go back away from Bitcoin towards credit-based money, most likely. The reason why we're going away from credit-based money now towards fixed supply money is because we have tapped out on the credit. We have reached the end of the credit bubble, a giant 75-year credit bubble, and we have diminishing marginal returns on credit. We're going to have low growth and low inflation, which is pretty much a silent depression. Emil Kalinowski of Uredale University years ago coined the silent depression, and that's what we're kind of living in. If you live with zero growth for 20 years, I mean, just think of Japan. It's the lost decade, okay? So you could say it's the lost depression or the silent depression. But that's kind of what we have in store for us until we change the money. And the people that change the money and go away from debt-based money, there's going to be a massive global debt jubilee. And what happens in that case? That is a deflationary event, actually. Because if money is credit and credit shrinks, that's deflation. So the end of an inflationary bubble is deflationary bust. And that's what we're going to live through. And that's what's going to push us towards Bitcoin, most likely. That's my opinion. And then in years, hundreds of years down the road, when we get the demographic problem fixed, when we get some other things fixed, maybe, and the world is going back towards globalization, back towards trust, and back towards all these other things, then most likely a form of credit-based money will come back. But it was the brief period after World War II where there was this huge amount of international global trust and that international institutions and all these things that allowed a credit-based system to expand. Okay, sorry, I'm getting some family notifications. I'm going to mute these. All right. All right, that's enough preamble. Let's get into the actual video with Werner and Tucker. And they have some bookmarks here. So, how banks create money from nothing. That's where we're going to start. 1416.
Most significant, but you have a story.
Let's go. Where is 1416? Okay, that's about good. Let's just start right. How about right there?
What? So, at that point, I was really in trouble, and I needed divine.
Let me know how the volume is, guys.
Intervention. Because, humanly, it was impossible to make this link, and all the experts were saying there's no link, but there was a link.
Okay, he's about to start talking about credit-based money and credit creation. Dex Invictus back with us. John Jay says they prefer number go up in wages. Yes, exactly. And I mean, we're measuring everything, right? And so you want GDP to go up. Yes, we measure real GDP, which is growth minus inflation, nominal growth minus inflation. But, if you are in a fixed supply world with shrinking demographics, most likely your GDP is going to be going down over time, at least for a lot of period of that. And so anyway, all these numbers in society, you want them to go up. And so it's much easier to go up with inflation. Good. Thanks, Dex. Okay, let's check Telegram one more time before we get going. All right, let's continue.
And when I understood that, I knew exactly what data to get. Now, what Professor Sachs and Peter Boone were arguing was that, you see, how if you're a Japanese landowner, you own this super expensive real estate, and now you figure out it's probably better if I buy half of California, let's say.
Which they did.
So let's do it. They were arguing, well, they would have to sell the land. Now, who's going to buy Japanese land? And it was true that foreigners were not buying Japanese land. It was totally overpriced. No foreigner would buy Japanese land. So only other Japanese would buy it. But that means the money stays in Japan. And that means there's no link. So that was their argument, you see. But I realized that's not how it works, because I'd spoken to a lot of practitioners. That's not how it works. And the solution is, and it's the solution to many other puzzles in economics, and to essentially almost all the big puzzles, and there's many in macroeconomics. Macroeconomics has not been successful for 200 years.
I've noticed.
Yeah, exactly. It's been a failure for 200 years, no progress. And that's actually official. There's a study in the, what's it called?
Yeah, I wouldn't say 200 years. I would say at least 50. But that's one of the things that I really concentrate on, and trying to create a somewhat of a holistic framework, macroeconomic framework that explains monetary evolution. I think if you can explain monetary evolution, that will slide in, because I think a lot of the micro stuff obviously is figured out, and I'm partial to the Austrian school. But you could talk maybe monetarist, or even the neoclassicals. I mean, they're close. Okay, they're close. But the Austrians, I think, are correct on the micro scale. And then Hayek was starting to get into evolutionary thought. So he was talking a lot about cultural evolution towards the end of his life. And I think that's if he would have been 20 years younger and had 20 years more ahead of him, he probably would have gotten to something akin to evolutionary economics, I think. And so that's where I have picked up, and I'm nothing compared to Hayek, of course, but that's what interests me. And maybe I can be a drop in the ocean in pushing economics forward. That would be pretty awesome. Okay, let's go.
Journal of Economic Perspectives, which is, it's quite a highly ranked journal, in 2019 by two Stanford University professors about progress in economics. And they mention that, sadly, we haven't had any progress in macroeconomics for at least a century. Okay. And why is that? So the solution to all this and why economics has made no progress is bank credit. Now, bank credit, and actually you should say fully, bank credit creation. This is a concept that's been a taboo or a secret in economics. Banking had been frozen out of economics for a long time. There's no banks in economic models and theories. And that's, of course, also why they don't work. Because in reality, if you ask some ordinary people...
That's a great point. That's an absolutely magnificent point. Think about like Austrians, it's all about the individuals. It's not about banks. You need to have different multi-tiered actors that have different types of abilities. And even the Federal Reserve, okay, when they have their targets, they have their employment target or R star or whatever, their different, their model targets, then they go in and they set policy to try to get to those targets. Okay. But it's not a target that is created with the understanding of a central bank. That's kind of hard to explain. So these models aren't created with a central bank in there, but the central bank is the actor that's supposed to get the market to these, to work on these models. So this is what Richard Werner here is saying, that these models are created without the understanding of a banking actor, even the type of actor that we're talking about. I mean, there's all types of different actors. There's mom and pop shops. There's large corporations. There's people that like to save and YOLO degen traders. Okay, so there's all these different types of actors. There's money allocators. There's savers. And there's credit creators. Okay, so banks are credit creators. And you have to have a model that has all of these different types of actors, and they're all acting under different incentives and stuff like that.
In the business district of any town, they will tell you, what's important in the economy. They will mention banks.
Yes.
But ask an economist, an academic research economist, and they will not mention banks.
Well, ask any person, who do you owe money to? The bank. Some version of a bank.
Exactly.
Yes.
Well, the reason is that the economists follow this theory that banks are just financial intermediaries. They just, gather deposits here, do their analysis, credit analysis, risk assessment and all that. And then they allocate the funds and invest. Okay.
Right. They just take a percentage. They're a pass-through.
So they're intermediaries.
Yes.
But that's wrong.
John Jay said you found it odd that he doesn't mention the Austrians at all. Because they do bring up bank credit creation, yes, but Austrians do not consider multi-tiered actors. Like I call it like a layered agent. Okay, so in Austrian economics, all actors are individuals. So yeah, they might talk about banks, but they don't talk about banks as anything but a group of individuals. So I think it gets that wrong. Okay. And yes, he doesn't bring that up. It's because it's still pretty fringe. I mean, we're Bitcoiners, perhaps we're previous gold bugs. And so we were really well aware of the Austrians. Maybe we're libertarians or anarcho-capitalists. And so we're well aware of the Austrians. But most people aren't, 95% of people, 95% of Tucker's audience probably, well, he has a pretty based audience. So maybe 50% of his audience doesn't know anything about the Austrians. But yeah, that's interesting that he didn't bring it up at all. I haven't watched any of this interview, by the way. So there you go.
It's not what they are. It's one theory of banking, and it's still the one that's still dominant. In all the textbooks and the leading journals, they still use that. But actually, if you look into it, you realize there's three theories of banking. A second theory, slightly older, that was dominant until the 1960s, so-called fractional reserve theory. And you may have heard this fractional reserve banking. What is that? Well, this theory says, and this part is similar, each bank is a financial intermediary. It just collects deposits and then does the analysis, lends out the money. But in aggregate, as banks interact, there's money creation. Oh, and that's where students' ears should have pricked up. Money.
They kind of call this shadow banking. That's maybe the most common term people will have heard. But yeah, the global financial system is not just what we see. And what we see is actually the smallest part. It's the tip of the iceberg. And the larger part of the global financial system is this intrabank market. Okay, that's the shadow banking system.
They even talk about a money multiplier. What? That's the second theory. Now there's a third theory. And that one had been made out to be a wacky conspiracy theory.
Oh.
But it is the one that was more or less quite widely known until about a century ago. And that's the credit creation theory of banking. And this one says banks are not financial intermediaries. Banks are special. They have a unique power that no other player in the economy has. And that is the power to create money. And actually that theory had been called all sorts of names like, this is kooky people and, cranks. Keynes said in his general theory, or it was the treatise on money, these are the cranks who talk about the banks creating money.
I think the average person believes the ability to create money is reserved for governments alone.
That's absolutely correct. In fact, I did a survey with my students in Frankfurt in 2011. My audience was getting larger when I was teaching at Goethe University Frankfurt. I was only sort of for a few years substitute professor, optional courses. So the first one was only 50 students, but next one was already 150. In the end, it was 450. Everyone was there, also from politics and law. And so I thought, this is a great audience. Listen, guys, let's use these numbers. Let's do a survey. So I sent them out, because if you've got so many people, then if everyone does 10 questionnaires, you're talking big numbers. So we did a survey of central Frankfurt. And one of the questions asked was just this question. Who do you think creates and allocates the majority of the money supply in the economy? And to make it easier, here's multiple choice answers. The government, the central bank, the financial markets, banks, and so on. Give a few options. or savings, people through their savings, which is another economic theory. So, and the answer was, just as you said, and you spoke the facts, 84% responded either the government or the central bank are the ones that create and allocate the majority of the money supply. Because that's common sense. It's something very important that clearly affects everything and everyone. It should be in the hands of the government. It's what people feel. But it's not true.
But it's not true. Yeah, that's exactly what I've been saying for how many years now, guys? I've been podcasting since 2016. I think I really had to come to Jesus about this credit-based stuff around 2017, 18. Maybe 9, yeah, I would say 18. And I've been preaching it, and it's not a popular theory. In Bitcoin, everybody knows that the central bank prints money. Everybody knows it. Everyone knows the government prints money. That when the government borrows money, that's actually printing somehow. And when the central bank swaps assets for a highly liquid asset for a very low liquidity, non-fungible asset, that's somehow money printing too. Everybody knows that to be true in Bitcoin, but it's not true. It's not true. That's the fight that I have been fighting for how many years? Let's see. There was a question here on Telegram. Tim Bradford. How do you put a timeline on when this deflationary bust will arrive? How do we know that we're at the end of the 80-year debt cycle and we can't continue for another 80 years? Great questions. The great financial crisis was the peak. I think that the peak kind of was between, I would say, the 90s into the 2000s. So after the Cold War, the 90s into the 2000s, and then the 2009 was like the beginning of the end, where you simply cannot create the way that the system created inflation and created credit is breaking down. And we see this now also in the deglobalization movement and the rise of populism and protectionism. Okay, so all those systems work against the global credit market. If you think about it, like what characteristics would you prescribe for the best possible global credit market? Well, you'd have to have very strong trust in global institutions like the UN, the IMF, the WTO, the World Health Organization. All those things are losing trust right now. We're going towards protectionism. We're going towards populism. And so everything that you would prescribe, I mean, we could list off a bunch of things, but everything you prescribe to have the best global credit market conditions, we're going away from those things now. Okay, so it's just a matter of time until the tipping point. And the piece de resistance on top is demographics. If your population is going to be cut in half in the next 100 years, you can't grow. I'm sorry, you can't grow. And it becomes more of a zero-sum game. You get more and more protectionism, higher and higher tariffs, more wars, less peace. So the Pax Americana is dead. Now, the timeline for this is we're getting closer and closer to this. The smart countries are going to be adopting Bitcoin because Bitcoin still has half of its monetization to go through. Probably another 15, 20 years of monetization till Bitcoin can become a global reserve asset like that. So the smart countries will buy Bitcoin. Bitcoin will be worked into the financial system, and slowly but surely, collateral and the way collateral's handled, the way that the interbank market is handled, all this stuff will be Bitcoin based. And at that point, we probably can have, it's going to be a slow process. Of course, some countries will stiff arm it. Like I think Europe right now, the EU is stiff arming Bitcoin, and they're running headlong into a demographic crisis. They're running headlong into an industrial capacity crisis. They're running headlong into a monetary crisis. And so some countries won't turn towards Bitcoin until it's too late. And that's going to be a massive, massive blow. But you can minimize the impact of the end of this credit bubble, the bust, by slowly switching over to Bitcoin. And really the market will do it. If you just let the market figure it out. Like one thing that's great that's going on in the United States is they're trying to open it up and make like very friendly regulation. Let everybody build things here. There will be scams, and I hate that fact, but the market will figure out a way to cushion the blow, to cushion the bust. But if you don't allow the market to do that, like China, like Europe, pretty much like Japan too over there, they're going to have a hard time. And that's one reason that I'm very bullish on the United States relative to the rest of the world. I think we're going to have a hard 50 years here over the next 50 years, but it's going to be much better in the United States than it is going to be in other countries. So great answer. Okay, cool. Thanks. Bitcoin Standard, all their salaries denominated in sats. Salaries would need to decline over time, assuming the value of each employee provides stays flat. However, typically employees get more productive over time with additional experience, etc. So this may not be that big of an issue as it is today. In my honest opinion, there will be way more contract work in the future and way fewer salaried employees. People will do a job that has a fixed pay or fixed pay over a short period, like less than a year. Interesting. Yeah, there could be some radical changes for sure. One of the thoughts I've had is, like company stores. Remember like back in the day, you would work at a company, and that company, you would have a neighborhood, and everybody in that company would live next to the factory in this neighborhood. There would be company stores. You'd shop at a company grocery store, the company clothing store, these types of things. And within that little microeconomy, they could have another currency in a Bitcoin world. So I think those types of things might come back in certain places. A lot of times I think that we're going backwards kind of, or we're regressing. We're going to economically regress. And so if that is going back in time to those other eras, we should expect something like that. Facing my face. I don't have the link right now, man. Sorry. I'll look for it after this. All right, let's continue with this.
That's not how it works. And so what is the answer? Well, of these three theories of banking, which one is correct? Well, what's the scientific thing to do? Is to do an empirical test. That's what a scientist would do. But it turns out I was the first to do an empirical test of the three theories of banking.
Empiricism and economics? I didn't know that happened.
Exactly.
You ran experiments and replicated them? I thought that was...
Exactly.
Here's a depressing but true statistic. Nearly half of American adults.
So can deposits get lent out? The fractional reserve theory says that the bank needs
Quotes from top.
which of the theories is in line with the data and which is rejected by the data. Now, to do this, I needed a bank that would cooperate. And my plan was, well, I'm going to take out a bank loan, and we're going to watch inside the box, inside the bank's accounting system, how are they accounting for this and what transactions are taking place when I take out my loan. The intermediation theory says deposits get lent out. The fractional reserve theory says that the bank needs to have excess reserves at the central bank, and that's then used for the new loan.
Yes.
And the credit creation theory, you know what it says? It says when you get a loan, no money is transferred to your, it's transferred away from anywhere else, and you just credited new money out of nothing that is not transferred away anywhere inside or outside the bank, which seems, quite sort of extreme.
Like, that doesn't seem extreme at all. That's exactly how it works. Most people, I guess, can't have that, conceive of that, but yeah, I guess I haven't thought that it was transferred away from another account for so long that it seems kind of weird to think that, oh yeah, it goes from this account is debited and this account is credited. That seems more extreme and weird to me at this point. But no, of course, it is just created out of thin air as a deposit. But I hope that he talks about the other side of the balance sheet. And I think I talked about this before we went live on YouTube. But so right now we have credit-based money. We don't have fiat money. A lot of people call it fiat, and I understand. I am swimming against the current when I talk like this. But fiat money is just like when you add more units into your account. Okay, you print money out of thin air. More units go into your account. Boom. That's fiat money printing. But credit money is when, yes, you poof money into existence and you put it into the deposits of other people, but it also creates a liability or an asset. It creates a liability for the customer, but it creates an asset for the bank. So on a balance sheet, you have two entries that offset each other. And I said, even in opening there on Telegram, is that the asset, that's the loan itself, is actually more valuable than the cash that they create. So they're creating money, but it's chasing even more goods. So it's almost like a deflationary process. But yeah, that's how you create. That's how you know it's credit money. It's not pure fiat. Now, the acceptance of this credit money, you could say, depends on fiat from the government. This is legal tender. But the nature of the money is not fiat money, okay? Stream got dead. What are you talking about there, Dex? Did the stream stop going out? How is it now? It is thundering here, so that might have something to do with it. Wait to see. Let me go. Let me bring it up. Showing live. Yep. Okay, I'm good. We're good. Let's keep going, rolling with this.
Magic.
In fact, one uses the convention is to use Latin for this. The money is created ex nihilo, out of nothing.
Yeah.
So when it did the empirical test, the conclusion was the financial intermediation theory is rejected and the fractional reserve theory is rejected. Banks create money out of nothing. By the way, you can look it up. It's the most downloaded paper of all Elsevier publications called, and it's open access. So, can banks individually create money out of nothing?
Any bank. Just to be clear, not just central banks.
Any bank. In fact, that's the whole point. We're talking about normal banks.
John Jay, what policy violation on my side? That would be crazy. I don't want that to happen. You guys know that I've lost a YouTube channel before. So let me check my email real quick, see if anything came through with that for the channel here. Oh. Yeah, you know what it is? I guess they're copywriting this. Yeah, they said it says copyright warning, probably for the Richard Werner, for this Tucker interview, actually. Just happened again. Dang. Okay. Well, what can I do instead? Let's see. Let's see. I think Swan Bitcoin. I just don't want to get my channel taken away again. Okay, let's see. They had some points broken out about it. If I can find it. I thought, when was this tweeted? Oh, that's just retweeted. Oh, these are all just retweets. Maybe it wasn't on this thing. Gosh. Here we go. I won't play this, but let's okay, we'll just read through this. This is going to have to do because I don't want to get my channel deleted. They talk about Japan's crash, a manufactured mess. Werner dove into Japan's 1990s bubble burst. Low interest rates funneled bank loans into real estate, inflating sky-high prices. When it popped, property values tanked, small banks failed, and big ones got bailed out by the central bank. The public said the price through taxes and paid the price through taxes and stagnation. This boom-bust cycle happens because economic models don't account for how banks direct credit towards assets like houses instead of businesses. Okay, yeah, this is an important point, and it goes towards what a lot of people talk about asset price inflation. Oh, Jay, you say it says stream is suspended for policy violation. Well, I wish there's a better way that they could notify you of that. That sucks. That sucks. Let me see if it's going out. I'm showing it's still live. I'm showing it's still live, but all right, we're going to keep going. Oh, it's back now. Okay, great. So what we're doing is we're just diving through this guy, Vibes Patrol, and he's talking about Richard Werner and his appearance here, talking about the Japan manufactured mess and credit and the way credit is directed towards assets like houses and businesses. This is what I talk about when I say asset price inflation. A lot of people will talk about asset price inflation as a Cantillon effect, and that's kind of correct. The Cantillon effect or Cantillon effect is where money enters the system. They get use of the money first. And then by the time the money works its way through the system, then the people that receive the money last, they have to deal with higher prices. Where the people that used it first, they get to use the full force of the inflation. But then the people at the end, they get the worst part of the inflation. So that's the Cantillon effect. But asset price inflation, in my opinion, is credit creation. So credit is created. That's where inflation enters the system, just like the Cantillon effect. But where it always enters the system through the banking. But where does that go? Okay, in a booming economy, it will go very broadly. Think about a hose that you have a nozzle on and you open up that fan on the hose so it's spraying very broadly everywhere. You have the same volume of water, it's just going more broadly into the economy. But when you start lowering, when rates start falling and central banks lower rates, what happens is you tighten up that hose, that's the nozzle, and credit goes into a more compact stream, and it goes into certain assets, and those certain assets are going to be higher in credit worthiness. So homes are relatively good investments because they are natural collateral for themselves, right? If you get a business loan, let's say you get $1 million business loan to expand your business, there's not really any collateral. Maybe you could put some of your business up as collateral, but that things could go south, and then the bank is going to have a hard time getting their money back, right? But on a house, that's not as much of a risk because they can always sell the house and get the money. So the credit creation, when rates go down and more credit-worthy uses of that money are getting that narrowed stream of credit, houses is a very logical one to go into. Also, margin debt for hedge funds, number go up on the stock market. So the S&P 500, the top 10 companies, they are very good bets for hedge funds to borrow money and buy Apple. Borrow money and buy these large companies because number always goes up. There's also other ways of passive investing is constantly pushing money into the stock market. And if it's into an index fund, it's mostly going into those top companies anyway. So it's low risk. All right. And then, of course, treasuries and different leveraged strategies around treasuries and carry trades and all of those things. They might be, there's also risk neutral type trades that hedge funds do, and where they are making a market, and so they're hedged on both ways, and they scalp the fee. Okay, that's a risk neutral trade, and if a bank lends money for these market makers to have a risk neutral trade, that's like easy money. So that's where asset price inflation, how that occurs is because where the credit is being directed is getting a narrower and narrower stream into those certain assets. So that's what I would explain on that. Okay, good stream is back. Hopefully it continues. I'm not going to play any more of that. Point says, honestly, could have been from letting that ad play and for using the Tucker clips. Oh, yeah, I think it's from the Tucker stuff. Will banks also start directing credit towards Bitcoin asset purchases? Could this mirror a boom collapse we saw in property? Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And that's where we start talking about like super cycle sort of stuff for Bitcoin, because it could catch on. And like the MSTR strategy, like let's say MSTR continues to grow, and continues to have this like accretive dilution. Um, I don't think that's going to go on forever, but this cycle, that type of play, and these treasury companies that are buying Bitcoin, yes, yes, that narrowed credit hose is going to go into Bitcoin treasury companies, and they're going to keep buying Bitcoin. So yeah, it's going to get crazy, and that's where the super cycle comes in. So we could hit 1 million. I stream a couple months ago. I think I was just doing Telegram at that time, but we were looking at the charts. We're looking at some of these type of theories, and really, at that stream, I came to the conclusion that we could have a crazy blow off top where we hit 2 million in this cycle. So like say 2026, we could have a blow off top at 2 million, and then we come back to 500,000 or something. But it would be a wild ride because of stuff like that, where the hose is getting narrowed and it's going into Bitcoin treasury companies, and Bitcoin treasury companies are buying Bitcoin. I don't think it will necessarily go into the spot market. It's possible, but I think the treasury companies are going to be sucking a lot of that in. Okay, let's keep going on this. Boom bust cycles explained simply. Without understanding banks as money creators, policymakers let credit flow to speculative stuff like stocks and property, creating bubbles that burst into recessions. Werner calls this a lost century of bad economics. Since the 1950s, productive credit builds factories and jobs, real growth. Asset credit just inflates prices. Okay. Causes high inflation later and kills growth. Japan's lost decades sound familiar, 2008. Yeah, I think that's correct. It's also, you also have to talk about diminishing marginal returns. So you guys know when, let's say there's no credit out there and someone takes their first loan, they're going to spend that money on the most productive uses of that credit, right? So you're going to invest $1 million and you're actually going to make $10 million. All right. The next 10 years time span goes by and maybe you can't find anywhere to get. So that's the 1970s and 80s. The next tranche of credit you get, maybe you only get a 5x return instead of a 10x return, and then a 2x return in the next generation. Okay. And then you start getting where all of the productive uses of credit have taken place. You've built up this paradigm that you can't, it becomes very rigid, and the places to invest and innovate get fewer and fewer. And maybe you borrow $1 million and you barely make back your $1 million. All right. Maybe you even make negative and you have to keep rolling over. So you have to borrow $1 million next year just to pay off some of the previous loan, and then $1 million the next year to pay off some of that previous loan. And so you're getting into negative payoff here. You have diminishing margin returns. And that's what happens at the end of these credit bubbles. And this is globally. It's not just one industry in one country. There could be these certain industries in certain countries, like real estate in China, that are poster children for this whole process. But it's globally. We are globally saturated with debt. We have global diminishing returns. And what happens? People start treating things like zero sum. Okay. I need that now, or I go bust. So I have to take it from him. Or, well, we're starting to get some major thunder. Hope my stream doesn't short out. But yeah, so that's happening here. Lost century. I wouldn't say it's a lost century. Just look at 1950s living standards to today. They're much, much, much higher today for many, many more people. So we've probably have 6 billion more people on the planet than 1950. I don't know exactly. 6 billion more people, and there's way fewer people in poverty. Okay, so it's not really a lost century. We've done a lot of good. Inflation can do a lot of good, but there's going to be a lot of bad on the backside of it. That's one of the most scary charts is the population chart and the poverty chart together, and then thinking about what happens at the bust. Okay, so the last 75 years, we've done such great stuff for the world. What happens in the bust? Well, a lot of that's going to be undone, unfortunately. Okay, going on to the next one. Credit creation, the real power tool. Banks don't just lend existing money, they create it when they approve loans. Werner asks, why use this philosopher's stone only to bail out big banks during crashes? Instead, direct it to small businesses or infrastructure for everyone. But elites like Alan Greenspan prioritize stability, protecting the rich over growth. See, I disagree with this. I don't think that's what they're doing. I think that the Alan Greenspan and maybe Janet Yellen is crooked and Bernanke's a little crooked. But I think for the most part, they don't want to pick winners and losers. They actually still believe in some sort of competition and creative destruction and those types of free market ideas. And so they don't want to go down the road of picking winners and losers. When it comes to bailouts, though, that's a little bit different because remember that line in The Big Short about for every percentage point that the unemployment rate goes up, 40,000 people die. Okay, well, what if you could stop it? What if you could stop those deaths by bailing out a bank? Is that moral? Should I socialize some losses to save 1 million people's lives? That's the question that you have to ask as a free market person, because I don't think that they're actively trying to create moral hazard. They just are faced with some really bad choices. And yeah, you can say, well, don't put yourself in that position. Well, they are in that position. So now what? Anyway, that's what I would say about that. I don't really agree there. Backlash to truth-telling. Werner's book, Princes of Yen, exposed Japan's central bank manipulation of the economy. Backlash was fierce. A U.S. official warned him the CIA was watching. His Japanese TV interview got canceled after central bank pressure via sponsors. The English edition publishers refused until he cut the chapter predicting the 2008 crash. Uncanny how it came true. Very interesting. I have to read it. I watched at least 2 documentaries on this Princes of Yen, but I have never read the book. So, banking's hidden history. Banking started with goldsmiths in medieval Europe who lent more gold than they held, creating credit secretly. Usury, charging interest, was illegal in Christian societies, so it went underground, often handled by Jewish communities. Gold obsession fueled alchemy, turning metals to gold, boosting chemistry in Germany and England. This evolved into modern credit creation, but central banks twisted it. All right. Is there any more below this? 7. Well, hold on, let's go back here. Oh, he just continued it here. Okay. Central banks born from war and fear. The Bank of England in 1694 was founded to fund wars, giving it a monopoly on money. This centralized control spread, influenced by families like the Rothschilds. Resistance came, like Francis de Gaulle in the 1960s, after failed demands. He sent a warship to New York to grab France's gold from the U.S. Fed, challenging dollar dominance. And this is one thing that led to closing of the gold window. And I've talked about this a lot in the past. So dollars aren't just printed when U.S. banks make loans. Dollars are printed when foreign banks make dollar loans too. And there's lots of dollar loans, trillions and trillions of dollars worth of loans outside of the United States. There's more money created outside the United States. There's more dollars created outside the United States than inside the United States. And so that was starting to happen and build up in the 60s, which de Gaulle and probably many others still had this old idea of how money was created, how money happened, and how inflation was happening. And they wanted their gold back. But they wanted to turn in dollars that were printed overseas. You print dollars in France, and then you try to turn them in for U.S. gold. Of course, the U.S. is going to close the gold window. Of course. But anyway, that's what I have to say about that. Werner's vision: more banks, more growth. History shows decentralized banks work. Near early 1900s, Germany overtook the UK with local banks fueling industry. Post-war Japan and China grew via targeted credit to businesses. Werner says we need more small banks, not CBDCs that monopolize control. Growth isn't scary. It's the key to prosperity for all. Yeah, I think this is a good thing to promote small banks, credit unions. I think those are good. But I wouldn't openly direct where credit is going. You can do that, like China has done that, and that's one reason China was built up so fast. Japan did that. That's one reason why we had the Japanese miracle. I mean, I called the end of the China miracle, and I said it was just like the end of the Japanese miracle. And they're very, very similar, the way they were built up. A centralized, planned application of credit. And what happened? Okay, what happened? You enter a prolonged period of stagnation. China's going to go through the same exact thing that Japan went through. The U.S. doesn't do this targeted credit to businesses, doesn't do the targeted monetary stuff like the Bank of Japan did or the PBOC does. And guess what? It's not going through this big 40-year boom bust with stagnation as far as I can see. It's continuing to grow. Like, look at the U.S. GDP since 1990 versus the Japanese GDP since 1990. The Japanese GDP is about the same as it was in 1990, and the U.S. is like 4 or 5 times as large. So targeted credit creation, I disagree wholeheartedly here with Werner. The targeted credit is not the way to go. All right, guys, we're getting some major, major storms here, so I'm going to have to wrap it up there. Let's see if there's any comments. Let me go back to my profile. Comments. Where am I going here? Back now. Not seeing any from YouTube. Okay, Reed says, what are your thoughts about the idea that Bitcoin will be used to recollateralize the system? Honestly, I'm not really sure I understand it completely. Yes, I think it will, but I also don't understand it. I don't think anybody understands it. There's going to be some innovation. Like, just think, Pierre Rochard wrote The Speculative Attack on Bitcoin. There was an idea of how a speculative attack would work, but MSTR pulling off a speculative attack, no one really could have predicted that, okay? The exact way that it happened. You can kind of get an idea. You can say, yeah, we're going to recollateralize the system with Bitcoin. But how exactly that looks, I don't think there's any good answers for that right now. If there were, people would be doing it right now. I guess it's the idea that because it's a new bearer asset that banks and governments will continue accumulating, they'll have real assets to borrow against, as opposed to paper assets like bonds or other liability type assets. Correct. Yeah. And I mean, just think of like Basel III and the tier 1, tier 2 capital. What's considered tier 1? Well, Bitcoin will be the primary tier 1 capital. But you know, the reason why those matter so much today, and the collateralization of the system matters so much today, is because it's credit based, and credit is risky. Okay, so if you have a bank that is 100% reserve with Bitcoin, I mean, the collateralization of the system, it's just kind of built in. It doesn't really matter. The reason why people are worried about it today is because it is a risk, where it's not going to be a risk and a concern as much in the future. There's also this idea, there was a guy talking about Bitcoin being used in real estate loan mortgages. And the mortgage would be slightly over the price of the house. And you would use that extra to buy Bitcoin to collateralize. So like 10% of the loan would have to be collateralized in Bitcoin. And because Bitcoin will grow, that will make the interest rates lower. But it also decreases the risk to the bank, just adding a different type of collateral in there that's going to be growing in value. So things like that, innovative stuff, innovative ways to lend. Again, when it gets figured out, people will do it and we'll say that's how it works. But I don't think anybody has a really, really clear idea on how it's going to go right now. All right, 5 people watching only because I'm not going out on Twitter. But if you guys are watching on YouTube, go over to the Telegram. Also, make sure you like, comment, subscribe. If you come to the video later, man, the thunder is just so bad. If you come to the video later, please like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll try to answer all the comments down below. Okay, well, that's going to be it for today, guys. Check out bitcoinandmarkets.com. Let me share this tab. I put this one out yesterday. Copper gold ratio gives insights on treasury yields, dollar at Bitcoin. Just kind of go through this a little bit here, give you guys a taste of what is on the pro. So I talk about some Bitcoin stuff up front. Then I talk about the copper gold ratio, where it's going, what does it mean, in my opinion, what insights can we grab from it. And I talk more about the Bitcoin price. Then we have takeaways, and that's it. So if you guys would like to support independent content, check out bitcoinandmarkets.com. All right, I'll see you guys all on the next one. Bye.